Okay, so welcome back to the mathematical modeling of football course. Today, we are going to focus on tracking data. And it's quite exciting coming to this stage because one of the original reasons we set up the YouTube channel that all the videos are hosted on was that we wanted to talk about how you can use tracking data in football. So tracking data is relatively new to football. Tracking the coordinates. I mean, when we talk about tracking, what we mean is we're tracking the coordinates of the players on the pitch. So where they are, how fast they're moving, where the ball is, whether we're also going to look at calculating if they get to the ball first and so on. So the tracking data itself is X, Y coordinates of the players on the pitch. Now you can contrast that with event data. Event data is what we've looked at, Y position of what happens to the ball. So there we only have the position of the player who's got the ball and the trajectory, or not really the trajectory, but the movement of the ball via passes. And that's what you've been doing a project on, and that's what we've been analyzing so far. But of course, that misses a massive amount of information because there are actually 22 players on a football pitch most of the time. And they're all moving around and they're all affecting the game. That's kind of the whole idea here, that this is a collective sport. It's not just down to one individual. So we're only, in some way, we're only getting, with the event data, 1/22nd of the information that we need to understand a football match. In fact, we get event data gives us quite a lot more than that, because it is true that the most important things happen with the ball. But really, to get any context or understanding, we need to have tracking data. And that's what we're going to focus on, and we're going to talk on today. So my plan for today is, first of all, I'm just going to tell you a bit about tracking data, where it comes from, the basic things you can do with it. And really, I'm just going to go over the things that are also in Laurie's video, which on the webpage you can go down and look at. And then I'm going to talk about pitch control, which is one of the first ways we can measure how a team is controlling space. And then I'm going to look at passing models. And then I'm just going to briefly mention a few things to do with formations, and also I think something to do with fitness data as well, which will come up in a lecture that Suds will give later in the course. Right, so and then the last part of the course, I'm just going to go through, we've got some very nice new tracking data available. Hammarby and Signality have very kindly agreed to provide tracking data from 3 of their games from last season. So I'll go through how to use that data later in the course after I've given the summary. Right, so let's get going then. Summary, structure for today, preview of video material. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of video material on the web page. As I said, when we set up the Friends of Tracking channel, what we really wanted to do was give information about how you analyze this stuff. And so what I've done is I've organized the Friends of Tracking channel material on the course web page, so you can go through it step by step and gradually learn all the things that you need to know. So I'm going to start by looking at measuring player movements, which is in a series of lectures given by Laurie. Then I'm going to look at pitch control. And then finally, I'm actually going to look at formations and fitness data. I've written here expected possession value. I'm going to go into that at a later lecture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about formations and fitness data. I'll have a break between 11 and 11:50. And please ask questions in the chat section, and I'll answer them as I go along. I'll take a reasonably slow pace, I always say, before I set off at speed in a random direction. Oh yes, and then the last part of the lecture will be Signality data, and just going through the code that I've put up on the GitHub. If you do want to already download this code, I've put the password, I've sent it to the course participants inside the course, but I've also put it into the Slack channel for those aren't registered inside the course. I can't share it publicly in that way, but I've put the password there so anybody who is determined enough can do it. So you can already download the signality data if you want to get started with that. Okay, so on Thursday at 4 o'clock, Pascal Bauer is going to come here, we're going to have a lecture by him, a live lecture. This won't be available on YouTube until he's cleared it with the DFB, the German Football Federation, who he works with. So it will be a live lecture at 4 o'clock. I'll send out the link for that. And he's going to go through where different types of data comes from in football. And I already mentioned, we've talked about event data. That's what we've been looking at so far when we talk about StatsBomb data or Y-Scout data. This is the data we've been looking at. I haven't actually talked so much about how it's acquired. It's acquired manually. So somebody sits there in the stadium, often two people if they're going to do it live, and they note down every event that occurs in the football match. You can do it live, or you can also do it on video afterwards. But the type of data we're going to talk about today is optical data or tracking data. It's the 2D positions of 22 players on the pitch. Nowadays, it's often at 25 hertz. And it's in theory, it's the 3D positions of the ball. Often you only get the 2D positions of the ball. That happens in the signality data that we're going to look at. There is another form of data which Suds, who will give a later lecture in the course, will go a little bit into, and that's GPS data. So GPS, you can have a local GPS system which has a very high accuracy, and also you can put it on various parts of the feet. You can put it on your feet, and you can put it on your body, and so on. And so there you can really accurately track things. We're not actually going to go so much into this type of data in our analysis for a couple of reasons. Is very seldom publicly available because in a sense it's personal information, because it also often includes heart rate and things like that. And also it tends only to have one team. So if you're working with a club, you only have your own team's position. And that isn't necessarily very useful in analyzing a football match if you only know where your own players are. So the tracking data for many of the tactical things that we'd like to do is much more useful. Okay, so in the first video, and again, to say all I'm going to do here is summarize the contents of the videos which are available on the web page. In the first video, Laurie goes through tracking data, and this is an example of data from Metrica, where they've released 2 matches. And here now we see the coordinates of the players. So there's all 22 players tracked their coordinates, red team versus the blue team. We've gone with the idea that we're shooting left to right. Now we have to represent both. If we're going to have tracking data, we have to represent both the teams. I think often in attacking situation, often people will show it in the same direction as it's shown on the TV, because ultimately you want to be able to overlay this type of thing, or you want to be able to explain it with reference to video. So when you display the data, it makes sense to have the teams attacking in the same way as you have from TV footage. There can be complications there, for example, that the tracking data, so the TV footage that might be from one side, the tactical camera might be on the other side, but often they're on the same side of the pitch. And so you should display the data left to right in the same direction, left to right, as if you're watching it on TV. That makes it so much easier to understand what you've done later if you're comparing it or overlaying it on TV footage. Okay, so the ball is here. It's that little black dot that's represented here. And that's basically it. We've got the positions of all of the and the ball. In the Metrica data set, there's actually a coupled event data. So the passes of the ball are shown by the event. And so, yeah, that's what I'll come back to that. So Laurie has also added vectors here, calculating the movement of the players. And the way he does that, as he illustrates in the video, looks at the difference, where they've actually moved over a number of time frames. Now, there's all sorts of little tricks there for how much you should smooth the data in order to get reliable measurements of these types of things. And Laurie goes into some of the details of that. It's very much a balancing art to try and get these things right. It's difficult to get exactly accurate measurements. We're going to come back to several times that there's quite a lot of errors in this video. There's lots of errors in the data. But you can quite reliably measure the direction of the players. And this is normally represented by adding a vector arrow pointing in the direction that they're moving over 1 or 2 frames, maybe 3 or 4 frames into the future. And so the length of the vector represents the speed of the movement, and the direction obviously represents the direction they're moving in. In this particular situation, the blue team have just won the ball and everybody is moving very quickly back. Even this type of information is extremely valuable because you can actually see how fast is number 6 moving, how fast is number 9 moving, and how fast is number 5 moving when this counterattack has started. So even already there's useful information for coaches and players who runs back fastest. 10 and 8 are running back slower in this situation. And as I said, Laurie's added the pass direction here. Now, in this particular data set, there is an event data set coupled to the tracking data, and he uses the event data to find out the position of the ball. Here's a little video of this. And he shows how to make a video. It's very useful if you make a video. I think that's the situation we see. I often think, I don't know that I prefer to watch football in this way, but I find I have so much more understanding of what's going on when I see football in this way than I do when I watch it on the TV, because you can actually see all of the players. You can see their movements. You can see how fast they're traveling. You can see, and we're going to show this in a little bit, you can see the space moving, opening up for them. And of course, what you don't see is the body positioning. So how well they're orientated with respect to the ball if they're receiving a pass. So that's a disadvantage. Everything to do with a tactical view of the game, you can see much more clearly from this top-down view with the arrows. And you actually see, even if you do have a very high camera, some grounds do have a high camera with this tactical camera, you call it. That tactical camera doesn't really give you the same impression as actually seeing it accurately top down. Okay, so before I move on to pitch control, I'll give you a chance to pose any questions you have about that type of data. Oh yeah, I'll just show so that Rodrigo is, as usual, he's in charge of the Slack page, and he's very able to help you if you need to get the Slack page to get hold of the data. Okay, everyone seems happy with where we are just now. No questions. A lot of you will be familiar with these ideas, well, with tracking data. Good, I'll move on then. So pitch control is one of the main tools that we use that we currently use a lot of for tracking data. And you see this more and more in the public domain. I haven't seen it so much on television yet, but certainly clubs are starting to use it. And it's a tool that we use a lot in my work at Hammarby. We use it a lot, and the players love to look at pitch control things. And I'll just tell you, there's a kind of history of pitch control, and I'll start building up from that. This is one of the goals which inspired me most when I was writing Soccermatics. And this is a Messi goal, obviously. And of course, Messi in this clip, he beats basically the entire team and goes through them and scores. But what is very interesting, if you look closely at this clip, is that, well, Messi isn't alone in this situation. You also have Xavi, Iniesta, and Pedro all surrounding him, and two of those players give a pass to him. And so how does that work? How do they manage to, and this was when it was called tiki-taka football. You don't really hear that expression so much anymore, but it was tiki-taka football of like moving the ball around, tick, 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 tack, 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 moving the ball around between the players and passing very rapidly in order to come directly through the opposition. And that's exactly what Messi was doing in that case. Of course, it's a brilliant run by him, but he doesn't beat all of those players. He beats them by passing the ball and getting the ball directly back to his feet again. And what I noticed when I started to look at these types of tiki-taka football videos is that you can break this down with a very old mathematical concept called the Voronoi Diagram. And there's two parts to these diagrams. These are the two situations. The first one is the pass by Xavi. The second one is the pass by Pedro. And what this Voronoi diagram does is it breaks down all of the area which is closest to Xavi, closest to Messi, and closest to Iniesta. So if I take this zone here, all of the points within this zone are the points that are closest to Xavi. All of the points within this zone are the points which are closest to Messi, and everything in this zone is the points that are closest to Iniesta, and so on. Now to be very specific here, that's within the Barcelona team. You're going to see, if you look for Voronoi diagrams in football, you'll see variations of this. Sometimes it's which point is closest for both teams, and we're going to see that in pitch control as well. But this specifically, I was interested in which point is closest for each of the Barcelona players. And the reason this is interesting is if you look at the two defending players here, they're right on the line between Xavi and Messi. And what that means is that they are maximally distant from both of them. So when the pass is taken from Messi to Xavi, they are maximally distant to these two defending players. And if they're maximally distant, you're going to have a greater chance of this pass succeeding. And the same thing is true over here when you look at Messi and Pedro. It's a much smaller area, but Pedro is spread out so that the opposition players are on the edge of the Voronoi diagram. So they're maximally distant, both between Messi and Pedro, and also Xavi. So this is by no means a perfect rule for football, but this seems to be, from a mathematical perspective, what Barcelona are doing in a wide variety of situations. And what I think is really beautiful about this is one thing to say, you know, here's the Voronoi diagram and this looks very nice. But what it means is, so the Voronoi diagram has what we call a dual graph. And that dual graph is just lines. If you just draw a line from Xavi to Messi, perpendicular to the dotted line of the zone and directly between them, this produces this Delaunay triangulation, which is the dual graph of the Voronoi diagram. And so there's a line here between Messi and Xavi. There's a line here between Iniesta and Xavi. There's a line here between Pedro and Xavi. And what's lovely here is if you maximize this space, as they've done here, you sort of get for free a triangulation which allows you to pass between all of the different players. So maximizing one criteria, i.e. space for yourself, also maximizes another criteria, or at least to some degree optimizes another criteria, which is these passing triangles between all of the players. And that's very nice because you don't need to explain Voronoi diagrams and Delaunay triangulations to players, all you need to do as a player is to think about how you are moving into space, how you are managing to create as much space as possible for yourself, and then the triangular passing alternatives will come for free. And so that's why I think the reason I want to go into so much depth in this is that's why pitch control is interesting. It's not just about who's going to get to the ball first, but if I'm going to go into the details of exactly what pitch is later, but that's why this type of approach of maximizing space is interesting, because it also starts to maximize your passing alternatives without you necessarily saying explicitly you're trying to maximize passing alternatives. Moving into space maximizes your passing alternatives as well. In a sense, when we're studying collective behavior, we like to think about this as a kind of emergent effect, that a simple rule, you move space, produces an emergent pattern, which is very good passing alternatives. It's not necessarily that you moved into space to produce these, but it's a sort of emergent side effect of this type of movement. Okay, so that's the theoretical background, and I like to tell this story because I wrote this in Socomatics, and I by no means want to claim that I'm the first person ever to think about using Voronoi Diagram in football. It's been used in other situations as well. But I wrote this in Socomatics, and then I went down to Barcelona to see Messi play, and also to visit La Masia, which is the research institute in Barcelona. And there I found out, I met this guy, Javier Fernandez, who's also in the Friends of Tracking webpage, and it turned out that he had just recently published a lovely paper called Wide Open Spaces. And what Javier does is he models, not the Voronoi diagram, but he models, so the limitation of the Voronoi diagram is it doesn't take into account the speed of the players. What Javier did was account for the speed of the players in how he produced these types of maps of who get to the ball first. So in this case, the green areas are where Barcelona players, who are in the Barcelona color here, where they would get to the ball first. The red areas are where the opposition team, the yellow team, would get to the ball first. The ball in this case is the white dot down here. And so you can see that a pass there, if it was possible to make, is probably going to get to a Barcelona player. A pass back here is definitely going to get to a Barcelona player. A pass here, for example. Even a pass there is relative. But now you can actually see who controls what space. And so how does he do this? Well, what he does is he essentially, him and his colleague Luc Born, what they essentially do is that they look at sort of radial player influence for each of the players. And that influence depends not only on the position of the players, like my original Voronoi diagram did, but it also accounts for the speed of the players. So if the player is standing still, then his or her area of influence is a circle around them. In fact, it's a Gaussian distributed variable they use. They use a normal distribution to describe the area of influence. And they also use a normal distribution for looking at a running player. So this is a player influence for a player 15 meters away from the ball, running at 6.36 meters per second in a 45-degree angle. And what they do for every one of these, they calculate, again, they have a normal distribution for they take it along the axis that the player is running. So there's a normal distribution going this way and a normal distribution going this way, which describes how quickly they'll get to the ball. I mentioned this normal distribution a couple of times because we're going to come to the way that Laurie does it in his lectures. The way he does it is he actually tries to calculate from a physics-based point of view. If you're running at this speed and you accelerate in this way, how quickly do you come to the ball? Javier's way of doing it is slightly different. He calculates a normal distribution based around these parameters of the direction that you're going and so on. So you can read more about that in his paper. But this is actually used inside Barcelona, and it's used increasingly more in other clubs when they're trying to analyze the positioning and how much space their team is occupying. If we step back to Laurie's lecture, he asks the question, what are the options available to the player on the ball? And he answers that question using a pitch control model of himself. So in this case, he says that the blue areas are the areas where a blue player will get to first. The red areas are areas where a red player will get to first. You can see that his areas are sort of a little bit sharper in their definition. And this is because it has a different underlying model. And this is important to realize that there isn't like one unique pitch control model. Every one of them is based on some assumptions. Javier's assumptions are very nice and simple. There's a Gaussian distribution, a normal distribution, which is related to the speed and the position of the player, which determines where they are. In Laurie's lecture, he tries to build it from a more physics-based point of view. He says, for a given location on the pitch, how long would it take for the ball to arrive there? How long would it take for each player to arrive? And so what's the total probability that each team will control the ball after it's arrived? And he repeats that calculation for all locations on the pitch. Again, you have to watch Laurie's video to find out the details, but this is an estimate of the arrival time, just given a fixed speed of the ball traveling. Very simple assumption. Oh. And then he calculates the player arrival times. Again, he makes an assumption there's a reaction time of, I think it's 0.7 seconds. You continue running in the same direction. Then you just accelerate towards the ball. And for that way, you can calculate the arrival time of this, for example, player 4 and this player 24. And in this calculation, he says on average, it will take 2 seconds for player 4 to get there and 1.5 seconds for player 24 to get there. And from that, you can calculate the probability that a particular player will win the ball. So it's not definite. And that would be because of some error in the reaction time, for example, and some error in the running speed and so on. So those errors will mean that it's never definite that one player will, will get there first in these types of situations. You really have a probability which you work out. And Laurie goes into the details and provides the code for how you work out these types of things. And that gives you the answer. Each of these points, for every point on the pitch, you just calculate the probability that a particular player will arrive first. Okay, are there any questions about pitch control before I move on to past probability? Good. So I'm a bit behind, but I've got some good questions here about the from the first part about the event data and the tracking data. Patrick Persson asks, has there been any work done on trying to detect events? Has there been any work done on trying to detect events actions from raw camera footage? Yes, lots of people are trying that. Well, a lot of companies are doing it. It's really, really difficult. It's one of those AI problems that basically hasn't been solved for various reasons. I think one of the reasons is it's very difficult to track the trajectory of the ball, even if you've got very high resolution data. So that's one of it. Another one is it's just difficult with things like interceptions, tackles, those types of things to get sufficient training data where you can really, really do this kind of thing. Yeah. How accurate is the tracking data? It's okay. Yeah, I mean, it's on an order of half a meter, maybe something like that will be the accuracy of it. I don't have exactly the accuracy of it. It has errors in it, but that isn't the big problem. Maybe it's about sort of 25 centimeters, half a meter is the accuracy of any given player. But that isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem is identifying the wrong players. So you'll find this in the signality data that's available is sometimes the players will just switch. So it thinks it's tracking one but actually it's tracking another player. And that's because they often use jersey numbers to track the players, and it doesn't quite work. Mirkas, is the share of pitch under control depending on the velocity of a player? Yes, it is. Again, in both of the models, both Javier's model and in Laurie's model, yes, it does. In Javier's model, it depends on it in the sense that the Gaussian is stretched depending on the velocity of the player. In Laurie's model, it depends mostly if you're running in the wrong direction to start with, then you'll be going away from the ball, and it will take you longer to change direction and accelerate towards the ball. Laurie's model is a very simple idea. You're just running in the direction you were running before, then you change your velocity when you realize the ball is going to a particular point, and then you accelerate towards that point. Lucas says, with this positional data in the Voronoi diagram, can we predict the pass receiver or the coordinate? I'm not exactly sure what you mean there. I mean, because the pass gets to the player so that you can receive it. But also I mean, yes, you can. I think that's the idea of the model. The idea of the model is that given where the pass went, you should be able to predict who gets the ball first. There's very little validation of the model against data. It's very difficult to validate it rigorously against data. So instead, you make simple assumptions about how the players will move. Could random forest be a way to get the same result with a more cost-effective model? I think there are lots of things, and maybe somebody can share this, but since we released, or since Metrica released the tracking data, there are some really efficient implementations of pitch control out there. So have a look for them. Really efficient and good implementations of pitch control have been made available. Good. Okay, so let's move on, and we will go to pass probability. Okay, so if you watch William Spearman's lecture video on the Friends of Tracking webpage, and also that I've made available in the on the course webpage, you'll find that he worries a lot about the details of pitch control. William Spearman now works for Liverpool, working with tracking data for them. And before he worked for Huddle, and he developed these tools in order to do this type of pitch control. He presented it at several conferences and so on. What he is worried about, of course, is the details of these things. So it's one thing to say that a ball will come to a player first, but there's other things. For example, when the ball is in the air, how do we calculate the pitch control then? So what happens when the ball is in motion? And so he does that by actually calculating the time of flight of the ball and working out whether it can be intercepted by the player, because often there's like more than one arrival point the ball can get to. So if you, in fact, I think I have a diagram. Oh no, I took out the diagram. Sorry. So he actually has in his paper, he has a very nice diagram where he shows a trajectory of the ball, and then he shows several players trying to get to the ball. And sometimes one player will miss the ball, and then it will be the opportunity for the other player. And so those types of pass probability things need to be taken into account. We together, Fran Peralta and I, or Fran did most of the work here, but he re-implemented Spearman's model and changed it a little bit in order that we could calculate what we call pass probability. And so pass probability, you can say maybe it is a pitch control model, but it's a sort of more detailed pitch control model where you try to model the actual dynamics of the ball. And so you have an equation for ball motion. What Fran did is he separated it into two parts. This is the equation for a ball in flight. This is the equation for a ball moving against friction on the ground. And he just made a very simple assumption here that 2/3 of a ball trajectory is in flight, 1/3 of it at the end, it's on the ground. Really naive and simple assumption, but you need to make these types of assumptions in order to get out models and to try and find if things work. Then he would calculate the ball trajectories. These would come out as these blue dots here. And he would calculate which player would get first to those points. And so he would have like Laurie, an equation of motion for the player, which is basically forces is the acceleration, and there's a damping term here. He'd solve all of these, and then he would work out who would get to the ball first. This isn't something that we're going to cover in detail or that I expect you to implement in the course, but it's worth being aware of, and this is why these top clubs are recruiting physicists. It's worth being aware that in order to create these types of models, a physics background is very useful to be able to describe the equations of motions of things. And then you also always combine both the deterministic model of motion with some sort of, this is actually like a logistic function. Well, it is a logistic function. You have some probability of interception, which gives a sort of smoother probability curve based on the original data. So again, you can get more details of this model from this paper, and also from looking at Will Spearman's video and some of his papers. Give you an example of this. This is one that we actually work with in Hammarby. This is a pass that happened early last season. I think if I just pause the video, it was just before the pass. You see here that Alex Kaczynicic, at this point, he has two pass choices. Either he can make the pass to the left winger who's running in here, or the striker is coming on the right here. And so both of those pass opportunities are available to him. And what we can actually do with the model is we can calculate the probability of both of them working out. So yeah, here's the exact situation, the exact moment that he makes a pass decision. Two different players. He's left-footed, so this pass is a realistic choice. This pass is also a realistic choice. And we can calculate the probability that the blue line here is the trajectory of the actual pass, and the green area here, the blue is the trajectory of the actual pass. You can see all the positions of the players. Green means high pass probability, red means low pass probability. And so his actual pass selection was quite a low probability. And even if he managed to get it into this area, you've got three defenders defending against one attacking player. So you could actually show Alex that this was the better choice in this particular situation. There was a much greater chance that the forward who was moving rapidly would intercept the pass instead of the pass choice that he actually chose. And this becomes a very useful tool, actually, to talk directly to players about their decision-making in different situations. And it also sorts out a lot of arguments after the match where certain players say, well, you should have passed me. You can look at these diagrams and you can have a more neutral discussion about the pass probabilities. I think I'll just, yeah, I've got 5 more minutes. So I'm showing an analysis of one of Hammarby's goals from last season. This isn't included in the tracking data, but it's there's other similar goals like this. So this was one of my favorite goals. So Hammarby are the green team in this, and against the blue team. And you see that we get the ball back here outside the box. Counter-attack. It's actually the player who got the ball back who runs up now and he scores the goal. That's Mojo Tankovic. So we can actually analyze this using all the steps. We can analyze this using both pitch control and pass probability. If we start with pitch control, this is pitch control of the whole situation. I'm just going to stop it just as the opposition pass goes into the box. So if you look when the opposition pass goes into the box, we actually have a lot of control of the area outside the box. And we've got a lot of control of our penalty area as well. So this is a relatively safe situation for us. And given our positioning, it's not surprising that we regain the ball. And the ball, you can think of this, I like to think of pitch control as like, who'll get to the ball first if it just drops down at random. And in this case, it's one of our players because we have a lot of control. It's Mojo Tankovic. He does the first pass. You also see, I want to emphasize here that this is our number 10, attacking midfielder. Does a very good run here to open up space on the left, dragging number 16 with him. Number 23, our forward, does a nice run there on the right, dragging out in that direction. And we have actually, in this situation, we have a lot of control over both attacking wings, which makes it very hard for the defending players. Ball goes out to the left and then comes back in. And so we can break this down using pitch control, because we can see this was the moment that I stopped the video. We have a lot of control over the penalty area. So when the ball goes in, we are very likely to get it back as long as it comes out in the right direction. We also control and open up space during the attacking run. And then defending situations are very by pitch control, but then when it's attacking situations, pass probability tends to be a better way of analyzing it. And you'll see here that here we have a very high pass probability. It would also be high pitch control, very high pass probability out here on the right, a lower pass probability there in the middle. And it's interesting here because Alex, number 20, is also the player who we saw in the other clip. This time he makes the 98% certain pass out to the wing. This is there's some reasonable chance that he can hit that pass back there, 60%, and it's into a more dangerous area. So there is some argument about maybe that is a good choice of pass, but this is the more certain pass. And then once Nico, number 40, has the ball, you can see that he's got two alternatives in here to 23, who's a striker, and 22, Tankovic, who got the ball back originally. And we can work out 65% there, but now you've got a sort of 40% expected goal, 50% expected goal if you get the ball there, slightly lower expected goal if the ball goes out there. So this is a very good choice of pass, which he makes, and we score a goal. Good. I will stop that. And what we'll do now is we will have a break. You can put in questions into the chat during the break, and I'll answer them when we start up again. And I'll finish off telling you a couple more applications of tracking data. Then we will go into looking through the code. If you haven't done it already, now is a good time to download the code so that you can look at it in Python at the same time as I'm talking about it. So do take the chance to download the code. Okay, we'll have a break, and I will be back at 11:15. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm back again. So great, great feedback here and questions on the chat. In particular, Diego asked, in this example, you're not considering some important facts that, in my opinion, affect the pass a lot. For example, the body orientation. Can you include them in the model using tracking data? Now, the answer to that is simple. We don't have the body orientation of the player. You can, for example, use the running direction of the player, which we actually do already have in the data. But I think one statistic I've heard is that 40% of the time, players are not orientated in the same direction as they're running. If you think about defensive movements backwards and forwards, you're looking forward and you're moving backwards and forwards. So it's very difficult to include that type of data. So when you see these types of models, there's two things to bear in mind. We're following, first of all is the two things. One thing is the limitations on the data. So it's just when we build a model, we just take into account of what we've got, which is the velocities of the player, with the positions and the velocities of the players, and not always 100% accurate. The ball trajectories tend not to be accurate from the tracking data. They tend to be better if you couple them together with event data, but they're still not perfect. And that also accounts for several questions that have been asked about, shouldn't we account for the fact that the ball is in the air or on the ground? Well, yeah, we should, but we don't always know that from the tracking data. So we're still sort of in the early days of using tracking data. So that's one of the reasons for these simplifications. The other reason it's important to point out that when we make simplifications in models like this, it's usually also so that we can understand and use the models. So we use the kind of as simple as possible, but no simpler, this thing that's attributed to Albert Einstein, or there's also a quote from George Box, which is, again, you should use the simple. All models are wrong, but you want some models are useful. So you want to make useful models which are simple and informative. There's always going to be problems with them. So those are the two reasons for the simplifications. One is just the lack of data. The second one is that you always make simplifications when you're making these types of models. I'm going to, there's questions about pitch control and performance and so on. I'll come back to some of that later. But again, we're still in the, again, the question is like a measure of performance. Yes, pitch control can be used to measure performance, but we're still in the early stages of that. It can be that a player standing in a lot of space is not doing anything useful, right? So if you have a player who goes and stands down at the corner flag, he or she will have a lot of control over a certain area of the pitch, but that area of the pitch won't be useful, and it will be playing attacking players on side or something like that. So you can't just use pitch control as it is. It's part of a framework of tools for understanding the pitch control, understanding the game. Great. Okay, so let's move on. I wanted to do this partly answers the question which just came up, or starts to answer the question that just came up about the value of this thing. Just to give you an idea where we're going with this, what I've discussed today are two different models of who will get to the ball first and what is a successful pass. One is the pass probability model. Green is an area where it's a poor pass, red is an area, sorry, green is the area where your team will get there first, red is the area where the other team will get there first. And then pitch control, which is basically if the ball just drops down random. You see that there's a very big correspondence between these two models, that they match up in a lot of areas. But we're also going to later, and this relates more back to the expected goals models and some of the value models, as we move on in the course in week 6 and in week 8 of the course, we're going to look at value models for actions. So if you think about expected goals as a value model for shots, and week 6 and week 8, we're going to look first at value models for event data, And week 8, we're going to look at value models for tracking data. And so that moves more into the answer to the question that came up just now about the value of pitch control. If you do, you can actually find, in this particular example, this is if you have the ball here, what's the probability of your team scoring if you pass the ball here, if you pass the ball here, or if you pass the ball here? Well, this is a heat map. The bigger the heat, the greater the probability of scoring. So the best pass possible is the one right to the goal mouth. But clearly, if you pass the goal mouth, you might get stopped by the keeper, because often the keeper's there. So it's the pointwise combination of these two plots which tell you the overall value, or give you an estimate of the overall value. And that's called the expected possession value. So this is going to be later in the course, but we're going to start in week 6 by working out pass impact, what the values of certain actions are other than shots, which we've already seen. And then in week 8, we're going to discuss ways of combining pass impact together with pass probability to give an overall value of what is a good thing to do in football and what is a bad thing to do in football. So by the end of the course, we should have gotten some suggestion of that type of thing. So just to prepare you, that's where we're going. Couple more things that I thought I'd bring up. One of them we're not going to spend so much time in the course on, but is quite interesting, and a lot of research is done, formations. So this was one of the first examples of a formation work that I saw, and I wrote about it in Soccermatics. It was done by Alina Bilakovsky, and she and her colleagues at Disney. What they did is they basically looked at team formations compared over a season. So the symbols indicate the average position of the players during one half of every match during a season. And you can see there's some teams here playing very reliable 4-4-2, strikers moving backwards and forwards. Here is a sort of 4-4-2 situation, but with a lot of more movement around here. Down here, it's a much more, this is probably due to a kind of more pressing play, but it's a there's 2 strikers up here. So it's 4-3, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's 4, yeah, I think this is a 4-2-3-1. So 4-2-3. I seem to have an extra player here. So it's some movement between those 2 players. So you can see they're changing their formation. And then there's also another formation here. This is a 5 at the back formation. And so you can actually identify, just by plotting the average position of the players, you can get reasonably clear patterns of the formations used by the teams. Since Alina's work, this has developed somewhat. And this is a nice paper. I've forgotten to give the credit there to Laurie, but Laurie Shaw has been working a lot on this formation things. This is one part of his work where he looks at defensive formations in 4 instances of time during the match, and the ball is in different places. The ball is here, ball is here, ball is here, ball is here. And how is the defense structured in those different situations? And you have a sort of 4-3-3 defending formation by this particular team, where they have 7 players behind the ball, 3 players maybe in front of the ball. So this is given the position, what's their most likely formation. And this becomes very useful because you can start to get, well, you can get a much, if you can actually look where the ball position is, you can get a much clearer idea of where the formation is, what the formation is, than just writing out the average positions, because they can depend a lot on the opposition. So this gives a nice clear idea of what the defensive formation of the team is. This is something that we do in Hammarby, and what we do is we break it down into 3 parts of the pitch. Actually, I wanted to take this one because I think this one's a bit cleaner. This is defensive formations for Kalmar, playing against an attacking Mjällby. So Kalmar are defending in this thing. This is when Mjällby have the ball in this area of the pitch. This is how Kalmar are organized. So they have 3 forwards defending here, 2 in the middle, and then 5 at the back. And you can see gradually as Mjällby move the ball up, how does Kalmar's formation change? And here they also have 3, 2, 5, or well, defensive 5, 2, 3 here. And again, and it becomes more compact. They move back, more central, 5, 2, 3. So a very clear formation. And it's important there, I think that was why I had the first slide, is that there's different formations teams have for defense and attack. So this is their attacking formation of Kalmar when they're attacking in this direction. And you can see actually that 3, the wing back here is coming out very wide, comes back into the middle in the center, but he's coming out very wide, and there is no corresponding wing back on that side. So this gives useful information about their build-up play. When they're attacking, they have one wing back that goes out wide, another which tends to stay central, or at least they did in that particular match. And so I think that's one of the important things with formation, is that it's context dependent. If you just do the formation over the entire match, you don't get as clear a picture as if you break it down into what the teams do, different thirds, and what the teams, whether they've got the ball or they haven't got the ball. Another thing we're going to look at in week 7 of the course, we're going to have a lecture by Suds Goldpandeshikan. I got nervous there because he's always joking about how nobody can pronounce his name. But Suds is going to give a talk about loads. So there's one thing to tell players that they should run around a lot. There is some constraints on how fast sprints, how many sprints players can do in the matches and how fast they can run. And Suds is going to tell you more about that. So he sent me this wonderful picture of different cars, which he told me, he told me that this, what did he tell me that? He told me that the first slide shows how different players have different efficiencies when converting their heart rate load into locomotion. So different cars have different efficiencies as well, and different players have different efficiencies. So he's going to talk a bit about that in his talk and link that to tracking data. And also he's going to emphasize a lot of what we haven't really touched on too much in the course, is how your role as a data scientist comes together with the sports scientist. Now, there's a lot of analysis of fitness data, heart rate, how many runs that you can do in a match. We don't really look at that so much in this particular course, but Suds is going to give us a brief rundown of that stuff and how it compares with a data scientist, and also how you work together with a video analyst. We've looked a little bit more about that in the course. So he's going to cover some of that stuff. Okay. And finally, I just want to say, before I go into the course webpage and the data, limitations with tracking data, I've already mentioned this for the question, does not account for body position. There is more and more studies, and I think Pascal is going to talk about this a little bit on Thursday. There's more studies where you do have body position. There's a study, Barcelona, who work a lot on basketball, have started working on this. Sometimes error prone. The biggest error is not so much in the position of the players, it's that you get ID switches between the players, where the technology which is looking for shirt numbers makes a mistake and switches to a different player. Ball is usually tracked in 2D, so there's some strange trajectories come up there. You often need to link to event data, is another limitation. Which is done in the Metrica data, but not done in the signality data. And there is a lack of public data. So we're working on this course, we're working with the Metrica data, the signality data. We're also going to look at some publicly available data from Last Row, who is, well, he posts on Twitter tracking of Champions League goals and Liverpool goals, for example. So you can have a look at that. We're going to use that. But generally, there's a lack of public data to work on with this thing. And I think that's something to emphasize here, that we're really at, when I'm planning this course, I really want to sort of put you at the cutting edge of what's going on in this field, and we still haven't really got everything together in terms of very reliable data which we can use for all sorts of situations. So you're still sort of working on the edge of the state of art data collection, and it still isn't perfect for every type of application that we could envisage. Great. I am going to stop the share there. Are there any questions before I move on to the web pages and the modeling the course? I think I've answered most of the questions up to this stage. I will start. If you want to, you can put in some questions while I'm getting this up. Good. So the place we're at in the course just now, we're on 21st of September. What I've done is I've put up both of the next 2 weeks lectures, because there won't be a live lecture next week. But I put up both of the lectures so you can start to work through this material yourself. We actually have already on the Friends of Tracking webpage very good video material stepping through this, both with Laurie and with Laurie Shaw and William Spearman, who works for Liverpool now, have made really nice videos stepping through all the stages we need here. So I thought I'd just look into those pages and just talk you through what you should be watching. Laurie Shaw starts in the first video. He's getting started with the tracking data, looking at Metrica's sports data. All the code is available there in the GitHub. So please download that and start working through that. Then we're here on this lecture. I've just given this lecture looking at tracking data in football. Then you can download the tracking data yourself. The code is here in the GitHub. I updated it this morning because I found a small problem with my coordinates and so on. But this is the code first for downloading the games. You'll notice here, this is an important thing. The password, username and password are not filled in. You can get them either from the course webpage as an announcement, or you can get them through the Slack channel. And this allows you to access the Signality API and basically download the data. You don't really need to understand any of this code. It just downloads the data and puts it in a folder on your computer if you've got the username and the password. Then I'll go through in a bit some of the basic code for plotting. You should download, before you get started, you should download the whole GitHub directory in order to run the code, because it's structured in the way that it's structured in the way that. One thing I've done here is I've rather cheekily put up videos of the matches as Dropbox links. Hopefully these work, but you can actually download and watch the videos of the matches. This is very useful if you want to actually know what's going on, especially if there's some errors in the tracking data. You can square that with the video of the matches, which is downloaded here. Yeah, I'm not going to start that download, bad idea. Oh, right, so it is available to play. I think it's possible, and this will be all sorts of problems here, but it's possible that the timestamps aren't available on those videos. Unfortunately, they just don't make the timestamps available. But the videos of the matches are there. You'll just have to work out the timestamps yourself from the starting whistle and so on. Actually have event data for these matches, but if you want to look at a particular match, you can go into the 12 rating system here. And for example, if we look at Hammarby, it was Hammarby home against Malmö, for example, was one of the matches. You can look at the actions for the players here. So if you're interested in looking for all the shots, for example, you can look at the shots here. Richard Magyar scored just with one shot there. So that tells you the goals at 87 minutes. This is the second goal. Yeah, just one shot and scored. A shot by Rodic there. Another shot there. So this can tell you actually when the different events occurred. So you have to do that manually. So there's definitely like a little bit of playing around manually with this data set and manipulating it to use it. So I'm afraid you have to do a little bit of that. It would be nice if we had event data for those particular matches, but we currently can't. We don't have publicly available event data for the matches, but we do have videos for comparison. So that's an advantage over the Metrica one where we don't have the videos, but we do have event data. Then the exercise, we'll discuss this tutorial on Thursday. You should have there's 3 parts to this. I'll go into more detail of this at the I'll go into more details of this in the tutorial. But basically the idea is just to get an idea of measuring the speed and direction of the different players. And so you're basically going to be re-implementing the things that Laurie has done on Metrica data, but doing it on the signality data. And then I'd like you, once you've done the basic things of analyzing the, so I'll just say this. So write a program which plots distance from goal, speed and acceleration of all the Hammarby players as a short time series. I plot these variables over time. The analyst is aware that there's limitations and errors in the data. Provide with a visualization of the 3 variables for a few different examples of a 15-second sequence of play. So this is basically, the idea here is you get an idea of how this data works. And so present some examples of this and then talk to her about what the accuracy of the data is and what you can expect from it. I think it's good for you to actually start working with the data and getting a feeling for what you can and you can't do it. And then I want you to do this. I want you to analyze, I'd like you to look at a distance to the nearest opposition player for each of the Hammarby players during their possession and analyze certain situations. So instead of analyzing the whole match, as I mentioned a few times, take certain situations and look at these metrics. And then finally, implement your own metrics that you think will help us understand how Hammarby scores goals and use this to analyze your chosen Hammarby player. Again, same thing as last time, 2-page document containing non-technical parts, then runnable code. And same thing as last time also, that the points out of 10 for the exercise. Great. That's what I want to say about what's up on the webpage. Oh yeah, no, I wanted to say one more thing, because I wanted to say that also, if we go to pitch control, please feel free, if you want to, it's week 5 of the course, but feel free to dig into this information. This is William Spearman's overview of pitch control, a lot of the articles that he cites during it. Then there's Laurie Shaw's description of how you actually build the model. And then I've got a video there, professionally produced one, looking at applications of pitch control. One thing that some of the ways that we've used it at Hammarby, for example. Great. Okay, let me just have a quick look at the questions again. Yeah, again, there's a question about straight passing and curved passing. So I realize the pass probabilities is almost a pass representation that it's a straight line. Doesn't mean that it's rare for players to do curved passing. No, it's not at all rare for players to do curved passing. It's just that, again, there's limitations of our models, which mean that we haven't included any curve passing. Anyone who's interested in working on these types of problems, they're really problems at the cutting edge of tracking data. So lots and lots of interesting open problems. The username and the password is in Slack. It's in information, I think. Yeah, I think it's in the update channel. Yes, it's in the update channel. So go into the update channel, subscribe to that, and you'll find the thing. Are modeling for tracking data difficult for newcomers in? Yes, I mean, I suppose this is this is the hardest part, and it does require more of a physics-based background and a stronger mathematical background. Good question. Yes, can we upload the hands? Rodrigo has a more practical question there. Please do share your hand-ins after the deadline tomorrow, and then you can give feedbacks inside the Slack channel. And even the people who are on the course properly, feel free to use the Slack channel to share your work afterwards, after the deadline. I'm very keen on giving each other feedback and talking to each other, but I would like that to happen after the deadline so that everyone has a chance to work on this themselves rather than copy someone else. Great. Okay, so finally, the last thing I want to do is have a quick look in the code. This is code that was partly written by me, but mainly by Fran Peralta, who works at Hammarby, and it's how we actually work with, I've got Anaconda there. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to assume that you can, so first of all, I mentioned that there's the, I'll make this smaller, it's sometimes easier for you to see. So first of all, I mentioned that first thing you need to do is download the data. There's 3 matches, Hammarby Elfsborg, Hammarby Malmö, and Hammarby Örebro. So download those matches first, username and password in the Slack channel. Then the second piece of code then loads in a particular match and visualizes it. Oh yeah, I have to download it again because I took it away when I, whoops, what can that be? I need to put a username and password in. Oh, okay. I'm going to stop share for a minute and I'm going to put the username and password in and download it again. Sorry about this. I've had to take that in and out so many times. So you go into the Slack channel. It's kind of ridiculous here that I'm not putting this into the video as well. Good, so you go into the Slack channel and now I'm re-downloading the data again. Get the password, put it in there, and then download the data. It takes a few minutes to do this, but you don't really need to understand any of this code in 12 Get Signality API. It just gets it and puts everything into a data frame, which it then saves, which you will then use in your analysis. And then once you've done that, well, then this code, I wanted to give you a few things to help you plot the data and get going. And so again, this is code that Fran provided me mainly with. It loads up, it pre-processes the files if required. Then it loads up, if it's already pre-processed, it just loads up the pre-processed file. And then it allows you to plot various situations. So you give it the home team name, Hammarby, you give it the away team name, Elfsborg. First thing it does is it gets the, there's a few things here it's going to do. So it's going to get the players in play. Everything's inside. There's a library thing here. So this function, get players in play inside the libraries. It finds out which players are on the pitch, handling various errors around that. So it finds all the players that are on the pitch, which is going to be very useful because the subs are also listed as players. So the ones that are on the pitch. That's what players in play does. Then it finds the transfers the coordinates. The reason we have this is that Signality often change their coordinates to various systems. In this case, it actually just changes 0, 1 coordinate up to a, can have a look here. Transform coordinates takes the 0, 1 coordinate up to 105.68 pitch coordinate, which we're going to use for plotting. I'll run this. So we're just loading in the data. Then the main thing that's done here is that we plot different situations. And again, this is inside the function preprocess thing here. We have a function which creates the pitch and plots the pitch on a 105/68 105.68 coordinates. Then the plot situation basically just loops through the players one at a time. We've said here that we just want to have the numbers on the team, where the home team that we're interested in. So the green dots are the Hammarby players, the yellow dots are the opposition players, Elfsborg, and the dotted line, the small dotted line here, is this ball position, and we just have the ball position over 10 frames. And the big one is where the ball is actually at that particular frame, but you can actually see that, so to give an idea of the trajectory of the ball. One of the first things you're asked to do in the exercise is to find the direction of the players and to put arrows on them. So the first thing you should do when you start is start to put arrows onto the directions of the players, so you know where they're moving to. And that's basically the code that you're provided with. Functions in there to do the basic loading these things up and to plot a situation. And your task is to start measuring the speed, the direction, distance from goal of all of the players and making plots of them. Basically following what Laurie does for the Metrica data, but also for the Signality data. Great. Are there any remaining questions? I'll also try and take some practical questions now if you've got any in the group chat, in the chat. I'll have a look at them. And I think that is everything that I wanted to say for today. So let's have a look in the chat. Yeah, Robert Everett asks, is it too late for me to start the course in week 1? I mean, we're in week 4. It's a pretty intense course. You can always start the course and join the Slack channel. Rodrigo helps everybody out with the password to the, or helps everyone out at register in the Slack channel. Yeah, there's a good question here. So somebody says my team is Wellington Phoenix in the Australian A-League. Right, so yes, I've seen that question a few times in the Slack channel as well. What do you do if you're working for a club that doesn't have tracking data, that doesn't have event data? What sorts of things can you do? Well, GPS data is one of the things that you can do with respect to tracking. So you can actually look at the speed of the players and start to go down the sports science route. Is not going to be very useful for tactical things because you don't know where the opposition is. But you can look at things, for example, whether the team is holding formation in various situations. So you can start to plot how you're organized then. Definitely the fitness data you can analyze. And then the other thing, for example, we work with the Hammarby women's team where we don't have much data. We look at things like entries into opposition's side of the pitch, entries into the final third, entries into the box, and then shots. So we actually look to see progressively how well the team are doing between those different tasks. So from getting the ball over the line. And so we just do that by hand. We note every time the ball goes into the opponent's half. We can also look at regaining the ball. So we can collect event data on those types of things. So my answer is that you find out we find out what the coach really wants to measure, and you use handcrafted event data to try and answer those types of questions. It also comes up, I think, one thing that I have not really talked about, but it is quite important here, is that many clubs don't use the event data that we talk about. They don't use the Opta event data. They actually have their own custom-made event data, for example, running into space. So you can have off-the-ball event data. And so that isn't publicly available because each club collects it separately. And that, if that's what you're interested in, just collect like how many times, and this often happens with professional scouts, is they just note at which times did the player that their interest run into and create space. So the particular metrics that they're interested in. And you can do a lot of the analysis we do on those types of metrics as well. There's a good tip there. I don't know about this bird's pie view. If you have a lot of video footage and time on your hands, yeah, you can do. You mean the bird's pie view? I take it, Lovre, that he's mentioned here is that you can actually do hand tracking. Yeah, there's a couple of tools which I've seen that are available where you can do your own tracking by noting the position of the box and where the players are. It then projects it down onto the pitch. And I did a lot of that when I was first working for Soccermatics. Because I didn't have any of the data, I'd actually trace by hand the positions of these things. So yeah, you can certainly do a lot of stuff by hand. The key really is to doing things by hand is that you work out before you start what it is you want to measure. And then you don't spend a lot of time measuring things you're not interested in. So decide what you're interested in measuring and measure that, and you'll be successful. You can do the same thing, and now I'm just babbling, you can do the same thing with passing networks. I train well, I don't train them anymore, they're under 15s. I train them in futsal, but I don't train them, but I used to make passing networks for them when they were like 9 or 10. And they'd love to see, in particular, if two players were just passing each other all the time. So that could be a good thing if they were really working well together, but it could also be a bad thing that it was just those two players playing each other. And to show it to them visually, all you need to do is before the game, just write up the 7 players it was at that time on a diagram in the formation you're playing, and you draw a line every time they're passing each other, and you actually have some very nice passing data. The tool that, yeah, so there's the tool about the one thing I've seen, I remember that Ben, I've forgotten his second name now. Let me try and remember that afterwards. If anyone else knows this, there's a tool by Ben, as his name's gone out of my head, I'm afraid. I'll put in a link afterwards where you can do that type of thing. And also the guy who does Last Row, he is also making, and maybe that is the bird's pie view, he has started to make lots of tools for doing this type of thing, and that's how he collects the data. You basically need to know where the penalty area is, because that stays still, and then you put the other things. So have a look at the Last Row web page on Twitter, or his Twitter, and find out the stuff that he's been putting up, which is really, really nice stuff for using broadcast data. As maybe another thing I should mention is that the data that we've discussed so far. No, it's not Ben Mayhew. Everyone's called Ben. He used to work for this Analytics FC. They were called. Now I've forgotten. Sorry, I got interrupted. I was saying, yeah, so the data that we've looked at today, that's taken from the tactical cameras at the ground. So it's the club data, but there's more and more AI work using tracking data using tracking data from broadcast TV footage. And this is a really big growth area that clubs are very interested in, because they only have the tracking data for their own league typically. But if they want to scout another player using tracking data, then they need it for other leagues. And so there's several companies who are using broadcast data from the matches in order to track the players and provide clubs with tracking data from every league. There's one company called Skills Corner, and there's another called Sport Logic, who have really mastered that art. And I think that will be a bigger and bigger thing, just because tracking data isn't available. And I think more and more tracking data will become available because those companies are working with broadcast data. Yes, it's Ben Torvenay. So Ben Torvenay, if you search for Ben Torvenay's webpage, I love all the Bens that are coming in here. The correct answer of the Ben question today is Ben Torvenay, who I've met several times. Really nice guy, did some of the best work starting up in football analytics. And you should look at his webpage. He has a lot of free tools available, and one of the ones he has is a clickable map for tracking particular actions. There's other things. Yeah, people have made apps. There's lots of apps for those types of things. I think at one club in Sweden, they made an app mainly to like calm their parents down, because when you've got parents watching 11-year-olds playing football, I think I subscribe to this. You shouldn't be shouting all the time at 11-year-olds who are trying to play a game of football match, telling them things. So what the coaches did is that they gave the parents an app where they could click where who was passing to who, and it sort of kept the parents busy and stopped harassing the children on the football pitch. So I think that's a very good tip. Give the parents some of the work to do, and it's the same thing that we do it at Hammarby, as we employ some of the fans, but we give the fans an opportunity to contribute by collecting data. And provided you have dedicated enough fans who don't mind sacrificing a bit of seeing the match, or a bit of the joy of seeing the match, then you can collect that type of data very reliably. Great. Okay, now I'm just blabbering a lot of random stuff at the end of this lecture. This has been an introduction to tracking data. There's not going to be a lecture of this type next week. There's lots of material for you to start going through online. I'll make a chat group so that you can ask questions about the next project. I've moved the deadline a little bit forward, so you've got 3 weeks to complete the tracking data project and send that in. And I'll meet the students in the course on at the tutorial times, and I'll see the rest of you in the Slack group. Great, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.